Hello and welcome to today's presentation of our paper Time-centric exploration of court documents, which is a work done by me, Philip Hausner, as well as my colleagues Dennis Aumiller and Michael Gertz, and we are all from Heidelberg University. So here on the first slide, you can see the outline, what today's talk will be about. But I want to right dive in and give you a quick motivation of today's talk. So the first thing we have to realize is that many court cases today consist of thousands of documents. If you take the Enron scandal or the Panama Papers or the most recent Cum-Ex files, they consist of thousands of protocols, witness testimonies, expert opinions, and the like. And if we imagine such a huge pile of documents here on the right-hand side, I think we can all agree that we don't want to read through all of this. We want to get the most important information out of this. And while for many judges this may not be realistic because they have to read all these documents, it's nonetheless a good starting point to get some summary of this. And we thought of creating some kind of chronology of a case. This is especially crucial in juridical domain where the event or the order of events is most important. And such a chronology can be visualized using a timeline. On the right-hand side, we have an example for that. This is from the NSU dataset or National Socialist Underground dataset, which we will also employ later on. But the NSU was basically a terrorist group active in Germany that attracted a lot of attention. And here in 1999, for example, we can see there was a robbery in Chemnitz associated with that NSU. And we can intuitively grasp it by looking at the timeline. Everybody can use timelines, and that's a huge advantage of them. But moreover, we also wanted to give exploratory utilities to, for example, a lawyer that can now use this exploratory framework to investigate the data set even more and to interact in some ways with the data. But now, how can we employ timelines for exploratory tasks? And our idea here is to assign a network to each point in time. So instead of just a text robbery in Chemnitz, we now have a network here that is bound to describe this robbery in Chemnitz and is associated with the date in 1999. And with that in mind, we will come to some fundamentals here because with what have we to start to do such a time-centric exploration? And of course, we have to extract temporal information beforehand. So in this paper, we only look at dates. So we don't use any smaller units than a day. That's in our case so-called atomic unit. And how do we extract temporal information? This is normally done in two steps. The first one is the identification of the expression. And we have here different expressions. We have firstly explicit ones, where the date is given. Implicit one, where some kind of world knowledge about the date is needed. And we have relative expressions like today, tomorrow, and so on. And in the second step, all of these expressions are normalized to some kind of standard format, which in our kind is year, month, day. And for our expressions above, that looks like this. Um, Now all of this is already done for us by using the temporal tagger idle time. And this tagger was also developed by our group a few years ago. And if you want to look at the source, you can look up the GitHub repository. So, but now I've also told you we want to use networks to represent our dates. And there is good starting point are co-occurrence networks. So they infer relation between terms just from textual co-occurrences. And in a co-occurrence network, nodes represent terms in the documents, and an edge exists if the two terms co-occurred. So on the right-hand side, we have an example for that where we build up a person co-occurrence network. And John, Frank, and Olivia are all persons appearing in the text, so they are nodes in our network. And John and Frank both appear together in one sentence in our document, so they co-occur and they share an edge. Same holds for Olivia and John. And usually we also have edge weights that indicate frequency of co-occurrences. So until now, this was very basic. So I think most of you will be familiar with this kind of NLP. But now, what we have done additionally is first we have introduced time-centric co-occurrences. So we don't extract co-occurrences through all of the text, but only around timestamps we have already detected. So we also use a window-sized approach here, And for the right-hand side here, we have an example where we use a window size of 0, and it should be mentioned that this is not yet a legal domain. This is just a general example. And here we can see all the co-occurrences extracted, and we only look at co-occurrences of nouns to be precise. So we ignore basically stop words. All of the co-occurrences can be seen here, and the date itself is also part of this co-occurrence list. So with that, we can build up co-occurrence graphs for each timestamp, and we call those time-centric co-occurrence graphs. A time-centric co-occurrence graph is a co-occurrence graph associated with one timestamp present in our document, and if a timestamp is mentioned multiple times in the document set, we accumulate all the co-occurrences around all of these timestamps into one network. So the next slides should make that rather clear, because now we have here all the co-occurrences extracted 2 slides beforehand. And for our associated time-centric co-occurrence graphs, because both of these sentences are associated with August 2nd, 2010, we get all the terms present in the sentences and all the edges that we have extracted from the co-occurrences. And all the red edges stem from the second sentence, the blue edges from the first one, and the black stem from both sentences. And for a single sentence, we can see that we have some kind of clique. So this is completely connected. This has to be because, of course, around one single instance of a timestamp, all terms have to co-occur. So next on, one interesting aspect of temporal information is its granularity. So an event can refer to different granularities. The first example here, the judge pronounced the verdict on 20th April 2000. It is very clear that the judge pronounced it on that day. We can pin it down to this 20th April. But in the second example, until 1980, the law only applied to adults. We only know it was sometime in 1980, but we don't know when exactly. Maybe in the beginning, maybe at the end. We can't say that from this expression alone. And we have the following granularities that we consider, which are years, months, and days. And that has a very cool property, such a kind of inclusion hierarchy, where a day is contained in a month, which is then contained in a year. And for networks, this has some neat implications. Because if we take here our day network for, let's say, the 20th April 2000, we have some nodes and edges. And if we go to the respective month network, the April 2000, then only nodes and edges can be added, but none can be removed because the 20th April was in April. So the nodes and edges have to be also in the month network. And this also allows for some more complex exploratory tasks where we can basically look at the day network and then look at the broader context by looking at the respective month network. Now, the next question we ask ourselves, how can we now achieve it that a user can look at the data itself again? How can we come from these more abstract information in our networks to the data itself so it becomes more interactive in a sense? And therefore, we introduce the sentence functionality or short sent functionality. And this means basically that we assign to each edge all pairs of 2 sentences in which the 2 nodes co-occurred. So here, this is another example from the NSU dataset. Those are all persons or locations relevant to the case. And here, Temma and Yoshgard, those were 2 persons that were highly prominent in the case. And now we can click here at this red edge, and we get all the co-occurrences of Temma and Yoshgard. Here we can see they're both mentioned in the text, and now we can look at the reasons. Why did they interact? And this is very crucial for a legal domain, since causes are often really important. It's not important to only know that they interacted, but how did they interact? Why did they interact? So, and lastly, we want to be able to rank nodes. So we want to know what is the most important node for a date, and therefore we introduce node weights and a so-called term frequency inverse timestamp frequency, which is highly influenced by the TF-IDF score. So just instead of documents, we have here timestamps. And we have here a term frequency. So how often does a term occur in relation to a timestamp? And we normalize this term. And we have the inverse timestamp frequency then. Lastly, we call something TF-ITF rank n, or a node is called that way, if it's the nth highest node, so the node with the nth highest TF-ITF score with regard to a network. So the highest ranking node would be the node with the highest TF-ITF score. And I also call the place 1, so the one with the largest score, being the highest, just to avoid confusion here. So now I've presented you a solid foundation with which we can do this thing of time-centric exploration, but we also want to look how now we can use this framework to really apply to a real-world data set. And therefore, I first want to now more formally introduce the NSU dataset. So as already told, this is a dataset about a neo-Nazi terrorist group. It was active until 2011, and it attracted a lot of attention in German media. The trial lasted 5 years, it cost millions of euros, and until today, not all questions are satisfyingly answered. So German public is really interested in that case. And our protocols here are non-official. They are from NSU Watch, which were observers of the trial, but there are no governmental protocols, so we use those. This document set consists of about 400 documents that contain about 1 million words and 15,000 timestamps, and we have a little bit over 1,000 individual graphs from 1990 to 2011. We only look at that range because we are interested about what the NSU did, but not about the proceedings of the trial itself. And the number of extracted timestamps for each year, they coincide with that. So most timestamps are extracted around this time. So with that in mind, we can now see some kind of typical workflow our framework enables. We have here our timeline where for year granularity, we show the most frequent terms in that year. And now we can, for example, click on Temme, that is a person present in the dataset, and all the networks where Temme is mentioned are highlighted. And now we can click here on the 6th of April. We get this network here we have seen before and can use our send functionality, looking now at the origin of their relation, maybe finding another date, and maybe now we want to look at this date, this network. Maybe we want to see why was this already also mentioned in that context, and explore the data set with that background. So now what remains is, do our networks really represent what should be present in the data? And therefore, we choose a set of entities and events that we now want to investigate more closely. We look at victims and cities of murders of the NSU here, because they should be present, right? They should have been discussed in the trial with in a large scale. So they should rank in the respective date-centric networks rather high in regard to the TF-ITF score. And what we can see here now are all the dates for the murders, as well as the victims and cities, and the TF-ITF ranks is high through the bank. So if we consider having about 100 nodes in each network, even rank 6 is still very high. So that works pretty good. But we can also look the other way around. If we take a victim, the victim should have the highest TF-ITF score associated with the date he was murdered. So for April 6th here, for example, where Yozgat was murdered, he also scores the highest in regard to his TF-ITF, and this holds for all victims as well as for all cities. One exception here is, for example, Nuremberg and Munich, where multiple murders happened, so he can't rank all first, but then they rank first, second, and third. So that's all fine, and that's what we would expect. So concluding now, I want to give you another slide here with our contributions. And first of all, we provided the community with some kind of framework for lawyers to investigate and explore documents, not only to look at the information, but also to then take a step back and look at the documents again, explore them by their own pace. And this is done by some kind of interactive time-centric graph model that is enriched with, for example, granularities or the sentence functionality. we argued that this yields meaningful insight into the chronology of a case and can reduce the time to get an overview of a case from weeks to minutes. If you go back to our big pile of documents in the beginning, that would need weeks to read all of this, right? But this concise timeline representation makes it possible to get a first overview in minutes. So maybe in a really large data set, 2 hours, but still that's a huge gain. And finishing now, I want to show some future work that we could imagine. The first thing being weighting refinements for different granularities, because we would argue that one weighting scheme cannot be best for all different granularities. It would be beneficial to vary here. Furthermore, we could apply this to a wider range of domains. For example, chronology is also important for historical domains, right? There the order of events is often also crucial. Lastly, we could use the send functionality in a more elaborate way by ranking the sentences so that the user gets the most important sentences first and less important sentences are ranked lower. Lastly, we could expand the timeline visualization by more dimensions, but today that's all, and I thank you for your attention, and yeah, thank you.